Great. So Jakob, you have the first item about the rate limiting MR.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to give a quick update that it's in review and to inform everybody of what it looks like right now. Because I don't know, it's quasi demo-ish, and I think it's interesting. I hope. So yeah, it's in review, and we reduced the scope a little bit because I had a conversation with Andrew where I realized that we were making the configuration part more complicated than it had to be. So what it looks like now is the configuration is an environment variable. It's just one environment variable. And the advantage of that is that it makes the merge request smaller, and this is already supported in both Omnibus and Cloud Native GitLab, so we don't have to do any follow-up there to make it possible to set the environment variable. This should just be this should be pure the configuration management that's in place should be able to handle this. I actually have no idea how SREs manage this, because we have, it's nice that John is here, because we have deployments both on VMs and Kubernetes, and I don't know where the config is stored, if it's the same repo, if it's the same mechanism, and what that looks like. But I'm assuming that we can set an environment variable in both of those without it being a big deal. And the environment variable is just for the bypass, which is not the interesting part here. Well, it's essential, but the bypass just there's not much excitement in deploying that. The more interesting part is to turn on the rate limiting and to correctly set up the HA proxy to label the things that need to be bypassed. And one of the things that we now have in the merge requests is that every request that matches the bypass will be marked in the JSON log. So it should be very easy to see that we are not labeling all requests that with the bypass, we are labeling some. And it should also be easy for the person deploying this to make a test request where they set the header from the outside and see that it gets blocked by HA proxy. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think the observability of this part should be good the way it is now. And go ahead.
I was just finish up what you're saying. I have a question.
So I think the observability of that part is good, and the mechanism of making the config change is simple, and it has a low cost for us to build it and ship it. And it ended up a bit simpler than I thought it would be at the start. So that is good. And yeah, we're now having conversations on the issues about how to estimate the limits, and that is a bit weird, but or it's a bit nebulous to me, but Craig thinks he can do it just from seeing the state from Rack-Attack, and all we need is to dump the state. So I want to see if I can write a little script to do that, and I want to double check that it is reasonable to dump the state, because the only way I see to do it is to do a full scan of the cache instance. And when I wrote that, I thought, we probably don't want this. I'm just going to say, like, we could do this, but we probably don't want it. But then Greg said, oh, I did it in 2 minutes. And that sounds too good to be true. So I want to double check that it works. Also, just to support Greg, not that I don't trust him, but it's just like it. Yeah, I want to double check that. And then the work sort of shifts to Craig figuring out the rollout plan and supporting him on that.
Awesome. Yeah, that was actually what my question was. Is that like sort of scheduled for happening?
It's part of the epic.
Yeah.
The idea of the epic is that we tick 2 checkboxes in the admin UI, and the checkboxes that say, well, 3 checkboxes actually: unauthenticated, rate limiting, web authenticated, and API authenticated. And we can only do that if there are same numbers below the checkboxes, because otherwise this will reject everybody's traffic. And we can only do that if we can allow list the people we need to allow list. So that goal of the checkboxes sort of has all this work hanging under it.
It's a little bit complicated, but one of the things that we might be able to do is, there's a way, I don't do it very often, but there's a way in, I think there's a way in Elasticsearch to make a query where you don't ask for like the rate at which like a certain request was coming in from a certain user. You don't like aggregate on the full bucket, but you can almost like break a bucket up into sub buckets and then ask for the max of those. So the reason why it's useful is that, say you are looking over the last 7 days, you don't want to say like, give me like minute by minute usage. What you can say is like any 10-minute period, like which user was generating the most traffic within that minute, right? It's a little bit complicated to explain, and I don't fully understand it myself, but
Do we have enough data in the log to identify the user?
Well, because of the context metadata, well, we wouldn't even use the context metadata. We could use the IPs, because we could use the allow lists that we've already got that are known. And so we could filter out those users. And then what's left, we could use this technique. It's like if you go, I'll go and give it a try. But basically what you can probably do is say like, who hits or who hit Rails the most in a like 1 minute period over the last 7 days. And that's kind of like, I'm not sure if the 1 minute periods are like aligned with minutes or if they're like rolling 1 minute periods, but either way you can kind of get a pretty rough idea of
so what you're saying is that we might be able to get good estimates with log analysis without having to go into Raketech data. That's a good point, because there shouldn't be any Raketech data right now. Although, I mean, once you turn it on, you can see what it's doing, but yeah.
I mean, you could turn it on with like exceptionally high defaults, right?
Yeah, that's what I would think. And then you could see, you could try to inspect the counters and see what they end up at.
I suspect that what's going to happen is, however high we have those defaults, there's going to be like a bunch of people that get rate limited, just sadly because of the state of things. But that doesn't matter. Like, I'm not saying that we should work around those people.
100,000 per minute. I'm sure we'd be fine with 100,000 per minute, and then we could dump the state out of Raketech. And the way Raketech works is that it creates a Redis key for each user that it's counting, but also for each time period. So it's like it looks at the clock and it says, for each minute I'm going to make a separate key. It doesn't literally do that, but that's what it amounts to. And then those keys expire from Redis. So it makes it a little bit hard to look up the state for a given user, because you need to know the time and you need to know how Raketech calculated the bucket that it's counting in. But if you're just dumping, if you're using a scan, you can just take all these keys and look at their values.
I'm interested how long, presumably they've got like a 1 minute timeout TTL or something like that. It's not 7 days or something ridiculous.
No. It's very,
it's brief.
The period is configurable, and the timeout is whatever is left of the period plus 1 second. So it is a very finely matched timeout. So these things should disappear almost immediately when they're not needed anymore.
One of the things we should just take note of is, like, if you change workload in Redis quite substantially and you start expiring a lot more keys, because this is in our persistent Redis as well, isn't it?
No, it's cache.
It's cache. Sorry, it's cache. But if we have a much higher volume of expiries, there's certain things in Redis that slow down a little bit with that. And I can't remember what they are offhand, but we've seen them in the past, and we should just keep an eye on those metrics. So, because it has processes that run, I want to say frequency is the name of the config, something like arbitrary like that. And we should just make sure that that is one of the things we look at as we roll it out.
We probably generally want to keep an eye on all the saturation metrics of the cache instance when we turn this on. Totally. But that's a good point. Yeah. I'll yeah, considering I don't fully understand. I mean, I sort of understand your idea of the log analysis, but I'm not sure if I could explain it well. So if you could write a comment about that, Andrew, that would be helpful.
I'll try and put together a sample query. There's like some certain rolling aggregations, and I'll try to put together a sample query, and that will explain it
Yeah,
much better than I can.
and I am going to spend a little time investigating how to do that Redis scan and see what it looks like. If I could just quick up, because you need to script it. You can't just say, here are all the keys, and now I'm going to look at all the keys, because then half of them will have been erased because of the rolling time windows. So you really need to query them as fast as possible and hope you don't, not too many have disappeared. That works well with the scan, because you get a batch and then you can immediately query that batch. So, but I want to script that up and see what that looks like. So then we have two approaches for Craig to choose from, either the 100,000 requests per minute or the log analysis, or both.
So I've just looked up that thing in Elasticsearch, and it's called, I mean, this is obvious. This is obviously why I could remember it. It's a sibling pipeline aggregation on a max bucket. I'll put together a query.
Sibling pipeline?
Aggregation on a max bucket.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I think I've shared as much as I can think of here. Are there any other questions on this topic?
I'd just like to add, please can you put those comments onto the issue that I've added in the agenda, because at least then all of this is collected together rather than putting it on the agenda itself.
Yeah, we have a slightly confusing situation now, because we're discussing the rollout in two different issues, both the dry run issue and the rollout issue.
Well, have we established now that we definitely don't need the dry run? Because if we definitely don't need the dry run, we can just close the ticket and move the whole conversation over to the rollout.
I'll see if it looks like we can do that, because well, I'm of the opinion we probably don't want it. So I think it's up to Craig, because I'm trying to yeah.
Alternatively, what we do is we open another ticket to talk about the log analysis to find that number.
Yeah.
Let me see if it's possible. I can just spend a few minutes, and then, like, if I can't do it, then it's not worth opening a ticket about it, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple things to add. I think the dry run's going to be really important, and I'm hoping that we can not turn this on and find, like, inadvertently start rate limiting something like internal API requests, or you know, an important customer. So if that's possible, that'll be helpful. Another thing is that there were a lot of customers interested in the whitelisting feature, and I know that this isn't like what we're going to be delivering to customers for advertising, but maybe there's the potential here that we can, you know, maybe inject Nginx config to allow some self-managed customers to utilize this. Is that worth pursuing or not?
Well, for those customers, yes, but for us, no.
Right. For us, I think we're just going to use HA proxy.
Well, yeah, of course, we could maybe also do it with Nginx, but yeah, we can try that. That would, the end result would be more documentation on how to do that, and somebody sitting down to try out this procedure, make sure that those Nginx configs things.
I think it's a great idea. Like, it's an omnibus change, right, Jarv? Is that what you're thinking? Like, it's like,
yeah, I mean,
not even, because you can inject arbitrary text into the Nginx config.
The facility is there to inject Nginx config, so that could be the first thing we look into.
So we just need to have an example thing where it says, here's how, here's a bit of text you can just inject, and then it does that job.
Because on the back of Craig Miskell's point about doing this in the product, I was thinking about it a little bit afterwards. Like, you could quickly get yourself into a quagmire with that, because if you've got like, and if you're not doing things in a smart way, if you've got like 50 rules and you're kind of just iterating over each of those rules, like for every request coming in for your whitelist in the application, like you'll slow the application down pretty badly. And obviously the way Nginx and HA Proxy do it is they build a kind of tree where they'll sort of route the requests down to the right part of the tree based on the seeder blocks. And if we built it in the product, we'd need to do it that way, because otherwise we just slow everything down really badly. And so it's kind of another thing to say, like, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should leave that to experts.
Well, the way that I've been trying to approach the project in general is that we need to make this work for what the SREs need right now to stop having so many incidents about the bad automated traffic that's coming in, and trying to make the change to the product as minimal as possible. But I have gone through and found a whole bunch of issues that seem related either to whitelisting, to the whitelist, to rate limiting. There's quite a number that have been raised over the past couple of months. And when we finish with the work, we can go back and comment on all of those issues and say, this is the functionality that exists now, this is what's there. And either that unlocks the ability for the stage groups to pick that up and continue, or they ask us to help them with putting it back into the product in a different way. But I was just trying to isolate this project down to what we needed to do, and then tell the rest of the stage groups what we've done as a result, and then leave the choices to them for how to take this forward a bit more.
I wanted to, yeah, thanks. That I agree. I wanted to ask something else about what Jarv just said, I wanted to talk about the dry run idea a little bit, because if you don't qualify it, it sounds like an obvious thing you want, but it's one of those things where if you think about how it should work, it becomes complicated. And that's why I'm now pushing against not having it, because it looks like the one we want is complicated and I'm not sure if we're going to use it. So let me try and quickly explain why I think that. The first dry run idea I came up with was to say we have these rule definitions in the initializer. So they run at startup, and they call methods on the Recatech class, like on a singleton. So they're basically stuffing rules into Recatech in a global variable, and that's then it for the rest of the life of the process. And I thought, well, we can make the code that stuffs those rules in dynamic and check an environment variable. And if it's the environment variable is set, we don't put a block rule in or a throttle rule, but we just put something in that tracks it and then only logs if something matches the thing. So then you log your violations, but you take no action. And this is something that Recatech can natively do. Like there is a type of rule called track, and it will follow the same logic as a throttle. The problem is that if you design it like this with there's one environment variable and it runs at startup, is that either you put everything into dry run or everything is active and kicking in. So that would be useful the first time we roll it out. When we're trying to get all the limits right for what we have now, then we can say everything is just a tracking rule. And we make sure that that looks good. And then we restart all the fleets with the environment variable away, they become real rules. But then what happens next time you want to turn something on or off? Do you put everything into tracking mode? Or do you put things one by one into tracking mode? And then, yeah, it gets a little more complicated to have a good interface to say to turn individual ones into tracking mode or not. And that's where I thought maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
I'm a fan of just having the environment variable that allows us to log, log the violations with whitelisting taken into account, because this will allow us to, at the very least, not be surprised by something we didn't think about. Like, for example, maybe an internal IP address that we thought we were setting the header for, but we're not, and that should be very clear if we're logging every violation, every rate limit that's kicking in. And I think I only really see this as the first time we turn it on. So I think that would be helpful. At least it would lower the risk of something bad happening, right? I mean,
yes,
then again, we could always just turn it off right away if we need to, but it's still like,
That was my other question, is like when you think of, we have to adjust these limits anyway. And if we do the thing where we do a log analysis or we set it to an insane number per minute and we push it down, then we might be able to get the same effect. Because say we allow 1 million requests per minute, and if we can effectively dump the state out of rack attack and see which counters are going up, then we can also see that we get sort of the same kind of capability. And the difference is that you're not building something that you can only use by turning the whole system into
Sure.
a dry run mode.
Yeah.
It's a bit tricky. I mean, I want this to be safe. I don't want this to be something where we knock ourselves out, because it has a great potential for doing that. But so, okay, so I guess what I'm saying is that we're still not sure yet if the dry run thing is what shape it should have. Like if we can do good enough analysis with 1 million requests per second, get good enough introspection, then maybe we don't need it, but we haven't quite established that yet.
Yeah.
In a way, of course, turning these rules from throttles into tracking is the best way to know if you're going to violate or not, because you're using all the rack attack is doing all its own application logic, and it's making its own decisions, and it's just at the end of the decision it still lets the request through. That's better than trying to reconstruct from the outside what you think rack attack is going to do if the numbers are different by inspecting its internal Redis state. Just that is inherently more complex. So another thing I thought about is, and I don't know if this is a good idea, but we could say that each rule has a name, and we could have an environment variable that is a list of names, and then we need to use some sort of schema to serialize the list into a string, but that's something we can figure out. And then when the app boots, it checks for each throttle if it's in the list of things that should be tracking only, and then you can turn things on or off individually. But it's not a very friendly interface, because as the SRE, you need to then, I don't know, put a JSON string in an environment variable and hope you got it right.
It just sounds very not simple.
In terms of what the last thing I was describing, I think would be relatively simple to make in the code, but it would not be simple to use.
No, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. Like in terms of having to make all of those choices, it just doesn't feel like it's a simple thing to use. Whether or not it's easy to create is a separate thing. And but I think it's about how we make a decision as to if we're going to build this dry run mechanism or not. And I think I'd already asked on the issue like how much work this is that we're talking about, but it sounds like the first step here is to do the log analysis and see if there's anything interesting there, and then use that as the input to decide about this dry run. Is that correct? Like, how do we finally make the choice if we're going to do this or not?
Yeah.
So what's interesting is I thought that my results were, I ran the query, and for API, I don't know if this is a public call, but I linked in there who the top offender is, which is no surprise at all, but it's much worse than I actually, every time I see it, it's more shocking. But I won't mention their name. But then I took that out and I just included web. And so this morning, the best result I got was that in a 1 minute period, there was one user who made 1,000 requests. And then I went and looked it up, and I looked up the user in that period, and sure enough, the results match like what we're seeing. So I think we can use that analysis. The only problem with it is that you can't sort by the worst offenders. So you have to sort by like average amount of traffic over the period. So basically you need lots of results and then kind of sort them on the client side. I'll send you I'll give you a.
So what the upshot is that based on the log analysis, you think that we can say with confidence that certain numbers are not going to cause a major problem for us.
Well, yeah, we can sort of construct like, if we know which the IPs are that we're going to whitelist, and we can filter those out because we've got them in the logs. How many IPs are in those lists, Joff? Do you know roughly?
I don't know.
You don't know. I mean, are they like hundreds or they're like dozens? I mean, you don't know. You don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Like,
I would assume dozens.
I think there's half a dozen or up to a dozen different categories of things,
Right.
and I don't know how many things are in each category.
Okay. But we can,
I guess like my biggest concern is like just the initial configuration complexity and rolling this out across virtual machines and Kubernetes for different ingresses, like for web API and Git HTTPS, and without having a dry run mode. A dry run mode would make me feel a lot better because then we'll have everything turned on the way that we want to turn it on with the whitelist in place. And then we can look at logs to kind of see like, okay, are we actually rate limiting anything that we didn't expect to rate limit? And it'll validate the HA proxy configuration is correct. The environment variable is set correct everywhere. I think this is the advantage as I see it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
well, I think the goal.
I wasn't saying that we shouldn't have a dry one as well. Like I agree with you. Like
Yeah. Okay. But that is the thing we're trying to decide here. Like we have this issue about having a dry remote in the epic, and from my point of view, and I think also Rachel's point of view, we want to decide what the scope is of that issue and whether it's in this app we're going to do it or not. And I think the problem we want to solve is that the SREs rolling this out need to be able to do this with confidence, and like sufficient confidence to match the severity of the change.
So
and that's yeah, and I just wanted to add, it's about making the rollout as safe and as easy and straightforward as possible. And I think taking the input from SREs is really important because they're the ones who are going to have to.
So thinking about this from a sort of product perspective, like I feel like, you know, we sort of talked about the dry run as the thing we'd be doing once, but it really feels like, and this is much more complicated to build, so I don't think we should do this as part of this epic, but it feels like what you really want is changes to be able to go into a dry run mode. So like I have my, you know, nothing set up, I make some changes, they go into dry run mode, then I roll those out. Then I want to change my existing configuration. I might also want to put that in dry run mode before I actually do it, because like I might be, in some cases I might be like doing it simply. But
you
like,
can actually, because you can individually flip environment variables on hosts.
Mm-hmm.
What about as we just, instead of having one header that we respond to, we have two, right? And the one is the one that we've got at the moment, and it blocks and it's like that. And the other one is the same thing _ dry run, right?
Yeah, like hypothetical. Like if we did this, what would happen?
Yeah. And then you can move ACLs, like, or you know, you can put
that doesn't work practically with the way Recordtech works, because the value of the dry run mode is that Recordtech increments its counters, and once you're inside a throttle rule, you can't say do increment the counter, but don't block. Then you'd have to basically rewrite Recordtech. There's another thing that occurred to me, and it has to do a bit with the product perspective. I think until now or earlier in this project, I've been thinking a bit too much from the point of view of I don't want to ruin GitLab with this, with complexity or weird stuff. And now I said, okay, we just put the config in an environment variable, and I want to get this out the door. So I'm shifting a little bit more to a pragmatic perspective of I'm less concerned if it's pretty and more concerned that we get the job done. So from that point of view, I wonder if maybe we should just have the global dry run mode, because that is a simple change, and it's a simple change and it adds value for this project. And yes, that thing will then sit there for who knows how long in the rate limiting code. But maybe I shouldn't worry so much about the long-term cost of having that thing exist in the rate limiting code.
If we start publishing this to other people, they might find it useful as well, right?
Yeah, and another thought I had is that with what Sean was saying about testing changes, you could put one host into dry run mode, and wait, no, you can't deploy changes to one host because you're in the database. So those are global.
Yeah, and also the Redis state is shared, right?
Yeah, I don't think the single host.
Right, and
was-
you also don't know the request rate because you get only the fraction that single host sees.
Yeah, so sorry, when I was saying
yeah.
that, I wasn't trying to present that as like, we're going to do this. I'm just trying to say like, that seems like the most useful version of this feature, right? Like, you know, what am I changing?
Yeah.
How would that work? But yeah, the other thing about the code living around is like, if we don't document it, we could always remove it once we're done with it on GitLab.com if we think that's an issue. So we could add it undocumented. Like if we want to keep it, we document it. If we don't, we remove it.
So I just
Can we remove that?
There was just to kind of a little bit more background. When Wikimedia moved across to GitLab, I don't normally read Hacker News threads too much, but for some reason I got onto a whole thread on there. And one of the big themes on that thread was how big self-managed instances of GitLab have all sorts of the same problems that we have when it comes to abuse and spammers and comment spam and all of the same things. And so that kind of made me realize that maybe there would be other people needing things like this.
Yeah,
as
the
well.
counter arguments to me saying we are only going to use this once is, of course, that we are not the only people who need this. And a bunch of other people are also going to use this once, but be very glad that they have it at one time. Just like we're going to be very glad if we have a dry run mode the one time we turn everything on. So that is a very valid counter argument there.
Can I ask
I
another
think,
question? Sorry, before just to interrupt there. When this was enabled the first time, when it was quickly turned off, would it have been helpful the first time if there had been a dry run mode?
Yeah, I think for sure it would have been helpful. I don't recall what we set the limits to. I think we set the limits to be fairly generous, and we still had issues, but I don't recall the details. But yeah, that would. I think having this in the product would also be nice, not just as like an environment variable.
Yeah. And the just to kind of put a context, the people that are doing the most requests, I'm seeing about 22,000 as a maximum in the last 6 hours, 22,000 in 1 minute. So that kind of gives you an idea of you know, I'm assuming you put the rate limiter below that, so they would have hit those pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. This was a useful discussion. I think I'm now leaning to saying let's build the simplest possible dry run mode because it's not that expensive to build and it is very useful, and it's maybe not the ideal thing from a product perspective, but it is still also useful as part of the product. And I think I'm going to worry less about how useful this is from a product perspective. Or I mean, how this fits into a vision of the product. I guess that's more the question. So short version, let's just do the global rate limiter. I'm going to think about that after the call, but I'm now leaning to just saying that, and then we can shape up that issue. It's not a complex code change, so then we just do that too.
That sounds good.
And this was a useful discussion, so thank you, everyone.
I added a thing to the agenda. It's actually completely not a demo. It was just, while I've got Andrew and Jav here particularly, I was trying to get some historical Sidekick stats. And I'm going to say historical, I mean last month, by shard. And I can't. Or I can, but only for the catch-all and catch NFS. I just get too many exceeded chunks limits. It seems like whatever I'm trying to do with this, and I can't find a recording rule that already does what I want. So like,
sure, yeah.
Do we need something? Like,
yeah. So I mean, that thing that you're looking at is already pretty aggregated, right? So there's a few things that you can do. The first
sorry, there is one thing I noticed about that. So that recording rule that I'm looking at is some without FQDN instance shard, but that won't include pod and the other Kubernetes labels we get, which is where I think we're getting the chunks from.
The problem is all the thrashing of the Kubernetes hosts, and that we need to collapse more of these things.
I think
No,
so.
I mean, no, it's not. There are plenty of metrics that don't, if you go into the observability channel, you see people asking similar questions. Like pretty much at the moment, sorry, a little quick rant. There's no thing that you can get more than 2 weeks worth of metrics for at the moment. So it's very rare to be able to find like data for things. And I think it's like a major problem right now. So Ben has.
And why? Why is that?
Well, if you look on that query, there's a big blur, you know, the Prometheus errors are always wonderful, but there's a thing there that says limit 8333, and Ben has like got an open MR that he opened on Monday to increase that number. So that's about 10 megabytes of data, that weird limit there. If you divide a chunk size by like 10 megabytes, it comes up with that 83333 number. And so I think he's going to extend it to 100 megabytes, and hopefully that'll make a difference. But there's like, yeah.
So is this a Thanos problem or a Prometheus problem?
It's a Thanos problem.
So Thanos is struggling to aggregate all the data for us, and it's aborting the query.
It's got some limits in place. Let me just see. I can probably, but there are things that you can do to help. The first is that you use this is like total technical debt and it needs to be fixed. You use a label called environment, and there's another label that's the same that's called env. And the difference between the two is that Thanos will route env to specific nodes, where environment will fan out to all the nodes. So the first thing you can do is you can change it to env. And then the second thing you can do is in the res block, you can try and choose like 3,600 to get like hourly data rather than to get one sample per hour. But that's obviously pretty dangerous.
That's after I thought that was on the Thanos side that was applied, but maybe I'm wrong. Like, so I thought that was after aggregation that it would do that, like it would apply that. But
yeah, you probably right, but it seems to. I don't know the technical details, but I do have better luck. But obviously, the thing there is that you're using a 1 minute rate, and then you're getting 1 minute sample every hour. So your data is going to be super sketchy, right? Because you know, you're taking 1 minute out of an hour and assuming that that's what the whole hour looks like. And I mean, it's a very rough. But I'm still getting those errors, so you know that didn't help. And then obviously max 1 hour sampling. But
yeah, I tried just using the like underlying metric with a rate, but it didn't really help. With like a higher rate, so like a rate of like an hour. But I guess again the problem is it's fetching too much in the first place.
Sorry, because I'll find there's an issue about this. Oh, here. In fact, I think. So I was talking to Ben about this on Monday, and he created a. Because Ben actually wanted to decrease the retention. So what I often do is I just go to Prometheus instead, and I actually get better results than I do from Thanos. But he wanted to reduce the retention on Prometheus down to like 3 days, which would kind of, and we'd lose that and we'd have nothing. So if you look on that thread, it's at 11,789. I thought he'd actually made the merge request already. Yep. So
yeah, it's been merged.
It's definitely not working because
it says 8333.
Yeah, you can see the problem still, right? Yeah, I think we should just ping him on here and ask if we can get that sorted out, and that might help.
I think, yeah. So let me see, like how much does it fetch? So it fetches from the 4th through the 3rd, so I can get about a day's worth of data. So I would be able to get about 10 days worth of data with this change, approximately, which would work for what I'm doing. So yeah.
I mean, it's still like, I don't know what the solution is here, but I'm really struggling because, you know, if you're trying to look at data, you can't retrospectively apply a recording rule. And if there's something, you know, I was looking at, well, actually on that thing, Matthias was trying to look at Ruby memory stats, and you don't know what you need recording rules until you're looking at it, so you can't retrospectively apply them. And it just so happens there that the cardinality is too high and we can't do this. And it's really kind of slowing us down, and I don't really know what the solution is.
Yeah.
It's part of the problem here that that Thanos receives automated traffic or untrusted traffic and needs to have defensive limits per query, and that we're exceeding that, because then maybe we could have 2 Thanos instances, one where humans can run crazy queries that use a gigabyte of RAM, but they get their query, and one that gets untrusted traffic and that has to work within constraints.
And possibly longer than a 2-minute timeout as well, and you just kind of like bear with it, right? You can't have asynchronous queries, but you could.
Yeah, I would be happy waiting, like, you know.
Yeah.
I would be happy with like a batch query thing where it like comes back in an hour and says, like, because I'm looking at historical data anyway, I just want the data. But yeah. Sorry, another question about the recording rule, Andrew. So I think for this one, it would help. Like, I don't think that's the problem, but I think it would help because at the moment we have, so these are like recording rules that we need to tidy up anyway, I think, but they use some without FQDN instance, which for Prometheus, we've got other labels, sorry, for Kubernetes, we've got other labels like pod, which are basically the same thing.
But yeah, so what's happening with that, there's been like a lot of backwards and forwards on, there's an issue, and I've been a bit snarky on it. But basically what it is I think what we've agreed now is that we're going to get rid of FQD. Well, FQDN will just kind of be relegated to like legacy, and on the instance label, Ben is supposed to be working on this at the moment. Add node label for Kubernetes Discovery 11.504. Yeah. So here's the original issue on that. So I'll put it in here, and then that kind of morphed into another issue, which has got less stuff on it. But I thought Ben was actually working on this at the moment, but there's no one assigned. But basically what I think we've agreed on is that the instance label will become, it won't be an IP anymore. It'll be like actual, in the VM's land, it'll be like the actual name of the VM, like FQDN, so it's not an IP. Because I just find, like, if you're looking at IPs, I just glaze over, like, you know, I don't like using that as a way of just distinguishing things. And then in the Kubernetes world, it'll be the pod identifier. And there's like a little bit of risk when it gets recycled that, you know, you'll get 2 pods that have got the same name, but it's better than, you know, any other solution. And Ben asked around, and other people are doing that as well. And then that way it's quite nice, because everywhere in our graphs where we use FQDN at the moment, we'll just replace that with instance. And that's much better, because instance is like a standard for Prometheus, where FQDN is kind of like our own label. And it'll have the ports on the end, but I'm not that bothered about the port. But I don't want to IP, you know, I don't want 10 dot, you know, that I'm not a fan of that. So the reason I'm getting a bit like banging on about it is, like, I've been seeing merge requests of people adding like FQDN, pod name, this, you know, on like piecemeal on graphs, because they're struggling with this. And if we just kind of did it, you know, strategically with the instance label, that would be much better than fixing individual graphs one at a time.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I just mean for this recording rule, like, we probably don't want some without anyway, right? Like, we just want some, and then you know, because this is like an older recording rule, like, I think that's why it's this way, but we probably just want like the explicit labels, and then we would have already dropped. I really, personally, I really dislike without, unless
outside of a width, you know exactly what you're removing, exactly because of this, because you add in a new label and then suddenly the cardinality of your recording rule explodes and you're not controlling that. So I tend to think it's like a bad practice for that.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, I'll ask Ben why I'm still getting a limit of 8333. Unless that, I'll double check the numbers, because maybe it's like there's an extra 3 in there that there wasn't before. But otherwise, I'll ask Ben like what's up with that, and we'll go from there. Sorry, like I said, that was a bit of a derail.
No, it's a really good. Someone should open up Jakob, do you want to open up an issue about the Thanos query for bad users? It's a proposal. Do you want me to do it?
I wouldn't
That'd be the
know.
one I'd use all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be my go-to.
I'm not sure if I'd be on it much, and I also don't know where the issue should go. Okay.
Yeah. For Timeland, the way I've done it is like I actually do lots and lots of small queries and I splice them together on the client side, just because I kind of gave up trying to do like a year's worth of data in a query, because it just can't work. So that was an interesting exercise.
Oh, right. Yeah, I could do it that way. I could get like, because like in Grafana, it's much easier to like slice for a particular absolute time, so I can slice it and then like build it up that way, I guess.
Do you want to do? Well, actually, if you do it with Jupyter notebooks and pandas, it's very easy to do. So
okay.
And pandas dash Prometheus.
Cool. Thanks for that. That lets me know it's not me. But yeah, I see that. I feel the pain.
Yeah. Please comment on that issue.
The one about the increasing the limit.
Thanks.
Yep. I think I was the last one. So unless anybody's got anything else.
I do have one quick question, but I'm going to stop the recording because I wouldn't want it to be. It's about a customer, so I'm just going to stop the recording.